goal here tonight is really just to update everybody on some of the work that's been happening and where we think we're going with this. So this is really the first in a series of forums that are going to happen. So we're actually doing 2 sessions, and we're trying to make them convenient to folks. So doing one this evening and then doing one actually on Saturday. So if there's somebody you are talking to that says, hey, I couldn't make it, but I'd like to know more, want to follow up, there'll be one this coming Saturday from 10:30 to noon. We're also going to have some additional sessions that kind of, as this project further develops, where there'll be additional opportunities for input. So if somebody can't make either of these 2, there's still going to be plenty of opportunity. We're going to do kind of the project introduction and where we've been, what we're doing, the existing building and site conditions, and then there's going to be an opportunity for community input. So limber up, you're going to need to be able to get up and kind of get back there and participate. There's a pretty good component of that there, the second half of this. So here's really what's going on. So if everything stays on track, we're talking about a renovation in all likelihood in 2027. It looks like a really long period of time, this design phase, going all the way through spring of 2026. But a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's a lot of steps and hurdles we have to jump over to actually bring this project to fruition, assuming it stays on track so we don't hit any additional road bumps. The idea, though, would be that if we can design this all the way through effectively next year, be completed with it sometime in the fall of 25, spring of 26, then construction would start and the work would be completed in 2027, because we're looking at a fairly significant project potentially. So again, looking ahead, just to give everybody a sense of what's coming up, we've got the current set of programs that are going on. In fact, let me back up. We already did some staff meetings, so we met with all the departmental staffs within the library. The goal is we want as much feedback as possible because this is a very important project and we need to get it right. So we met with the staff. Here we've got the first public forums. Following this in January, there will be another follow-up with the library staff, January 23rd. That's already scheduled. You can see the next public forum is going to be February 25th. Again, it's 5:30 to 7 p.m. and it'll be published well in advance again. So don't feel like if you don't get everything written down, you're going to miss out. And then we'll do another one on March 1st, which is a Saturday from 10:30 to noon as well. So what you'll be seeing at those is not the same information, but further development of this information as we move towards what is a project potentially going to look like. After that, we'll do another touch point with the staff, and then we'll come back for another public forum. Those dates are to be determined yet. And then the big deal, and this is another reason why getting your input is so valuable, ultimately this needs to be a project that you all support and that is what you want to have happen, because libraries are a little unique in that they don't get to approve their own funding the way some other organizations do. They have to go either to the city or the county commissioners. So there will be a process if the group says, here's what we would like to do, where we're going to have to go to the commissioners and say, do you approve of this project? And the thing I will put out there, just so we're crystal clear about this, because the library has been such good stewards of taxpayer dollars, they have no debt on this building whatsoever. There is none. So typically when we go to a library or a school, they've got some level of debt that they're working with from past projects they've done. So typically when they're doing a new project, they're just reissuing the same debt. And again, I'm going to say unfortunately, but I'll say fortunately, the library has been such good stewards of their dollars that they have no debt. So anything that they're going to do will have a tax impact. So that's why this is a big deal, and that it needs to be well understood and supported by the community to make this happen. So master plan and goals with this, again, just breaking down the things that we're trying to accomplish here. We really want to define the staff tasks and workspace requirements. The staff has really worked in a 50-year-old building at this point. This was built in the early 70s, so we're about a 50-year-old facility here. A lot of the staff tasks and workspaces have just adapted to what's been available. There hasn't been a major renovation in those 50 years that's reorganized staff spaces. We need to identify and prioritize the community wants and needs, which is why we're here and why we'll continue to meet some additional times to make sure we're capturing what does the community hope to have the library be going forward in the future. We know because the cost impact is significantly lower to utilize the existing building. There's been talk about, was the library going to move? Or are you going to tear it down and build a new one? I'm not gonna say never, because I've used those words enough time, but in all likelihood, no. We are going to work within this building unless there's just some great idea that comes out that's more cost effective and a better way to do it, because it's always more cost effective to use the existing structure that we have. We want to address concerns identified in the facilities assessment, so that was a process that we went through, and I'll share some of that data with you all to understand what's going on with our 50-year-old building. Determine the building organization, so that's kind of where are the spaces located within the building, and then address the site and connections to surrounding community. So the planning work that's been completed to date, so there was actually a strategic plan that was done in 2023 with Strativise, and I don't know if folks in this room participated in that. There was about 1,000 people that had participated in that and provided feedback, a couple of years ago. So that has been pulled into this. We've kind of read through that and brought that to the fore as we're working through this. There were some staff surveys that were done earlier in 2024, so all of that was brought in. And that was in addition to the work that we did with the staff as well. So there may be a point where everybody's like, all right, enough is enough. How many times are you gonna ask the question? But I'd rather ask 3 times than not feel like you gotta ask it all. And now we're in this, between 2024 and about mid-2025, we're gonna be in this master planning mode, which are the meetings that we talked about earlier. So the strategic plan, let's talk a little bit about what happened in that. So the strategic plan, for those who weren't involved, there were 4 components to that. There were some community stakeholder listening sessions, which was really just, hey, talk to me about a few series of topics. There were groups of like 6 to 10 people that were involved in certain areas, certain user groups. There were surveys that were sent out. That was the majority of where the input came from. That's where 800 to 900 plus people were participating in each of the various questions. There were then some focus groups and some employee listening sessions, so that similar to the state community stakeholders, the employees were given the opportunity to provide input. What came out of that was really this information right here. What you're seeing on the left-hand side are spaces, so it's talking about gathering places, meeting spaces available with no technology. Then we get into that box that's highlighted in red. What you can see there is a lot, and maybe you can't, so I'll tell you, because I know it's a little small. Those are the numbers that when you start to look at them really speak to, those were extremely important to the community. Those were important to the group that were providing responses. So what falls in that box are items that either between extremely important or somewhat important, they were reaching that 60 to 70% range of respondents said these are important to us. So the items that fall within that first box are meeting spaces with technology, and technology is something we've heard from a lot of different avenues that there needs to be more of that, so that's not a surprise. Secure early literacy area, age 0 to 5. Along with that is below that youth area, 6 to 11, and then teen area, 12 to 18. So all of those were 63 to 72%, very important to the community. Computer and technology area, again, that technology piece just keeps coming up, the need for access to that. Local history and genealogy center, 47% extremely important, and then somewhat important was 36. So again, you're hitting above 80%, that was important too. And I think for those who haven't used the library as a resource for history, I have to say Sue is probably the best resource we have in Wayne County, no offense to anyone else who's in history, but I know I have called on her a time or two and she just knows her information cold. The other 2 items that are in that lower box are study rooms and then interactive and engaging spaces. So I think this idea of kind of a lot of spaces to meet and kind of the interactivity is very important here at the library. And I think all of us that have been here have seen that in action and know how much that means to the community. So out of this, what was distilled down were 5 pillars. So these were kind of the hierarchy, high tier items that were important. So really the one down there on the lower left is the library being a resource hub. What's interesting is, for those who don't know, we're also involved with the library down in Liberty. In fact, we're probably involved with about 8 libraries right now, so we do a lot of these libraries. What's interesting though is everyone is completely unique. I mean, we come into each of these as though we know nothing, even though we're working on these, because they are very community based. What's interesting in the connection to Liberty is they actually had the flyer from when that Carnegie Library, the groundbreaking occurred, and from Andrew Carnegie himself. And there was a great quote in there about how he didn't talk about libraries as storehouses for books, but libraries as resources for community involvement and community engagement. So this idea of being a resource hub has been there kind of as long as libraries have been around. I think initially it was books because books were very expensive. Where did you get a book? I mean, you went to the library, you borrowed one. Primarily people with a lot of money, that were very well-to-do had books back, 100, 150 years ago. Today, that's more access to technology. You get into maker spaces, you get into large community spaces. So the resources have always been important. Just the types of resources that the library provides has changed, and I would say has really accelerated in the last 20 or so years, where libraries are no longer the stacks of books that you think about. The card catalog that I loved growing up, that I don't think anybody has one other than as some relic tucked away somewhere. Inspiring growth, and I think that is, again, that connection to community. How many events bring people together in this community and help to grow and buoy the community in this facility. So continuing to do that, keeping the community connected. I mean, there's a common thread against that. The green circle there is operational success, and then the next one over, which is kind of a purple, is team investment. I would say the operational success and the team investment is probably less to do with the public side, but those other three are very important to the public side and what we're talking about. And that quote right there is directly from that report, that more than ever, libraries are viewed as a community hub, as a connector to resources, information, aid, and social relationships. And the stake that Morrisson-Reeves drove into the ground as part of that is we will be that hub for the community. So I think that is ultimately the goal out of this, is to hear what you all want and for this building to continue to be that hub for resources for the community. So this next slide is a little bit of a leap, and I will say an architectural leap, because what we've heard is a whole lot of data. And a lot of that is kind of how we want, what we want, how we want to interact. But ultimately, as architects, we have to translate that into what does that mean within the building. So what we start to look to are kind of what are the values, what are the things that we care about, what do we want to see in the new space? And that's before we even think about what is anything going to look like in the future. Some of the things that we heard, that we've seen in these reports as we start to see these overlapping data points are obviously the community connections. Wanting to be the hub, you're connecting, all these different organizations here in this facility. Connections to the outdoors is very important as well. I think that idea that you can see out all these windows and be connected to the outside. I mean, there's been efforts to create some garden spaces around to kind of buffer between parking. Clearly that's important to those that use the library. Civic prominence. We've actually heard the opposite of this comment, and by that I mean the library is kind of hard to see. It kind of does a good job of hiding itself. If you know it's there, it's there, but if you don't, you don't. So I think this idea of having a little more prominence kind of in this area, because it is a well-trafficked area with a lot of resources around it, making sure it's clear the library is here. Along with that is that beacon or landmark. Yes, it's prominent as a civic structure and services that it provides, but how can it be more of a beacon or landmark for those looking for those services and easy to find? We heard a lot about vibrant and colorful spaces. There was probably more said about this in the children's area than any other space, but I think there seems to be a desire to just have that vibrancy that you see in some newer spaces that are being renovated. Spacious and inviting for all. I think there was a lot of comments about barriers to just a variety of different things, and I think, again, it's a 50-year-old building. It was completely fine when it was built, but that was before there was as much care given and concern about folks who have disabilities. And I have to say, the older I get, the more I appreciate the concern for disabilities. But there really aren't ADA restrooms here until we did the 2 restrooms upstairs a few years ago. So it's things like that, just getting into the building, the large ramp when you come up. We heard comments about if you've got mobility challenges, that can feel like a very long way to head uphill. Embrace technology. Again, that kept coming up of how do we incorporate technology, and then celebrate art and history. I mean, you look around and there's art in the space, there's relics from the previous facility here. Again, the resources that unfortunately a lot of them are tucked away and aren't accessible to the public. How do we kind of bring that out and continue to celebrate that because it is part of the fabric of the community and who we are. So that was the strategic plan and what we pulled out of that. The other thing that we've done, which is another layer of just data over this, because that's really what we're in the mode of. We've been in this mode of just collecting as much data as we can to be as informed as possible. We did a facilities assessment, which is really us crawling top to bottom from this, going into every closet, going into every space, you know, looking around to see what all we can see. What we really want to do, probably the last thing we want to do, is think about one of these projects and not understand, is there something that's going that needs fixed just from it's not fun that you need to replace a boiler, so don't forget about that. Because that's the worst thing we can do is do a fun project and suddenly the library says, well, geez, you forgot about the $1 million of stuff back there that's not as fun. Now we've got to fix that, and where do we find that money? So the facilities assessment was to really understand what's going on with the facilities. It may not be as exciting to do, but we need to make sure it gets taken care of as any part of a project. So it's more of kind of a nuts and bolts look. So again, the building was built in 1973, so we're 51 years old, with the Children's Edition in 1994. And the total square footage of the building is about 53,000 square feet. The upstairs is a little bigger than the downstairs because you've got two areas like the children's department and some other areas that don't have a basement under them, so that's where the difference occurs. So actually, this drove a lot of where we are at today. We had not anticipated this when we got involved, but we started to look, if anybody's ever paid attention out there in the front, or you were there the day of the farmer's market when we had the lift and caused quite the spectacle. What we were doing was trying to understand what we thought we were seeing down from the ground. And what we thought we were seeing is, you can see under that big M there that's in the far left image, if you look down at the bottom of the brick, there's kind of this line of kind of red there, like there's a gap in something there. That's the metal, the steel that holds up all that brick above it. And you see the gentleman there, that would be Tim O'Rourke, kind of Connersville structural engineer kind of looking. You can kind of see that piece of metal the way it kind of bows down there. What's effectively happened, and we didn't know until we got up there, is they've really packed everything really tight behind there, so water is unable to get out from behind the brick. So what's happening is, as it freezes and thaws, it started to push some of that brick and things move. It's also started to rust the metal that holds all that brick up. And you'll probably be, this is like when you get a car and suddenly everybody else has the same car you do. Now you're going to go out there and look. But what you'll realize is a lot of the brick on this building hangs out and metal supports all of it. So what that means is you go around the building and you can see the hand here in this image right here. You can see that it's kind of pulling away and pulling down because it's just pushed and moved and thinned out so much. So this was a fairly, we didn't expect it, kind of a negative surprise that we got that really told us, unfortunately, the skin of the building is not in good shape. Like something significant is going to have to be done to it. The other thing, and I think if you walk around, you'll start to see, you know, all of those numbers that are on that image there are things that we said, boy, these things all need to get fixed. And another perfect example is right out here in this lower courtyard, and all the brick is starting to move, crack, things are just starting to show their age. And again, none of this is anything anybody has done wrong over the years. I mean, it's just a matter of as buildings get older, these things happen, and a lot of this was driven by the way it was originally built. There's not a whole lot that could have been done to mitigate some of this stuff. The other things were interior items. And again, some of this is just code changes. So as an example, I like the stairs, it's great. But a lot of things around that, you could not build the stairs today the way that it is, just from safety concerns as code evolves. So again, there's nothing to say there's anything wrong with it, because at the time buildings are done, they're kind of locked in time, and we say that's what they are. But as we start to look forward into the future, we start to say, okay, what do we need to modify? Because as we start to do a major project, we're going to be beholden to what's current code, not what was the code 50 years ago. So that's why we have to start to look at these things. It gives us a sense of how expansive a project may need to be once we get started. The other interesting thing here, and I think people know this intuitively, but until you really see it in this graphic form, you don't really get a sense of just kind of how this works. So what you've got is just a color-coded plan of the upper floor and the lower floor. So the lower floor is on your left and the upper floor is on your right. Anything with color on it is areas that the public can utilize. The gray is all kind of back of house, staff, mechanical, storage, places the public doesn't go. What's interesting is the upper level, it's about 80% public and 20% staff. That's pretty normal across like a library. We pulled actually a couple of other libraries that we've worked on and said, let's just pull the numbers and see what they are. They're running about 75 to 85% public, so that 80% is kind of right in that range. If you look at the lower level, and that's why I flagged that in red, it's only 40% public and 60% staff. It's really almost upside down for what it should be. And what I'll say is, I think this is, because we see this a lot when we start to work with libraries, where you're moving from where you have a lot of items and books and things you're storing, you needed more of this space. As you move to where you don't have all of those items that you're trying to store, you really don't need all that space. So what we typically find, this is not surprising, is the opportunity to start to think about returning some of that space to public use. So I think this really tells that story that there was a real opportunity to start to think about, if this isn't working for the staff, which is what we've heard, that it's more of a we're fitting into spaces and it could probably be better organized, how as part of that can we start to think about maybe turning some of this back over to public use? So again, one other thing that we did want to acknowledge is there has been some recent projects. So this is the years roughly in which they were done. So from 2014 through 16, there were 2 phases of kind of an AV information service move and reorganization, and some ancillary finish work associated with that around the perimeter of those projects. There was the youth library project that was done, which was actually, and I didn't know this until I was informed by the library, more of an E-rate project, which is a way to get technology into space as a subsidized project, so you're not paying the full amount, so it's really taking advantage of a program that was out there to make some improvements. And then the restroom renovation, the ADA project up on the first floor. So even though, yes, on the face, some things have changed with the carpet, and it feels like some big changes have happened, these have actually been fairly minor projects, relatively speaking. Again, there's not been a major overhaul of the library in a long time. And I think this is, again, a good thing, because the library has been a very good steward of dollars. It's continued to work, you know, with the budget that's in the black. But I think the challenge is that they've been making do with spaces that already exist and just sort of fitting in where maybe it's not an ideal fit. And so I think knowing that, looking at that outside, that we've got some challenges we're going to have to deal with that are fairly large scale. I mean, it's really, you're saying the entire outside of the building needs to get dealt with. This is the time to start thinking about, if we're going to invest those kind of dollars, what do we really want the library to be going forward? So I think the case for significant renovations here, just to kind of summarize, is that the comprehensive facilities planning was identified in the strategic plan. You know, before we ever got involved, the strategic plan identified that there needed to be some comprehensive look at the building. And I think, again, that was feedback from how the building was being used versus how it could be better used if it was organized a little differently. Building systems are approaching end of life, so that's kind of that brick that I was showing you on the outside. We could have probably gone on with a lot of images. There's a larger report that kind of covers, you know, roofing and some other areas of the building that are getting to that point where they really need some TLC. Expanding the public areas into underutilized staff areas, so that image on this lower level that just showed the way we could potentially expand into this lower and expand services to patrons. The staff and operational efficiencies. I think to a person, we heard from staff, gosh, I could better do my job if fill in the blank with about 10 things. So I think that kind of potential to reorganize and actually be more efficient for the staff and make the job more enjoyable. And then I think building and utility efficiencies. The reality is it's an old building. So again, energy code tends to evolve. If we go back probably when this was built, and now I'm going to get myself in trouble and somebody's either going to shake their head yes or no. Prior to the energy crisis, that was roughly around, was that 75? I'm seeing some hands. So we're roughly there. What we find is prior to that, most buildings have no insulation or very little insulation. So we're kind of in that mode where there was probably no insulation in this building. So that's a place where building and utility efficiencies, as we start to think about a new skin for this building, we would incorporate that so that the operational costs start to come down to save in the building long term. So the extensive improvements that we're looking at are to really evolve this to a convenient and welcoming entrance. Again, that was a criticism we heard of it's not necessarily convenient. The drop-off sometimes isn't the best. I've got to walk around from the drop-off and up this, long trek to get there. If it's raining, that's not great. If I've got strollers, that's a challenge, in inclement weather. So making that more convenient for patron use. Visibility and connectivity to the surrounding entrance. Again, that being able to see the building. Improved spaces, again, just more tutoring and small group workrooms. And again, we see this throughout all libraries. People want to come and have more small spaces to do one-on-one or, 4 people workrooms. There's pretty limited of workrooms in this building right now. More accessible collections, and part of that is not so much that the collections are just fine here. It's some of the material that's stored, where there's not space necessary to bring it out. Some of the historical elements that are stored away and can actually be brought out. So how can we make those more available? And then the expanded and updated technology, which is more just about additional options to connect. And connection is a lot of things these days, but most of it involves some level of technology. I think ultimately the return on investments for those who use the library, including myself and really the Richmond region, is I think this is a great opportunity for this project to contribute to what I'm calling the downtown renaissance. I mean, if anybody's paying attention to what all is happening, we had some conversations about, well, do we wait? What do we do? And just to me, it just seemed like now is the time, if the library is going to be participating in what's happening around here, that this would be the time for this project to occur. Enhanced programming and patron experience. Again, everything we're doing is ultimately starting with what are the patrons getting out of this facility, which is why we're here to solicit feedback and thoughts on what we want to see here. Ultimately, it's going to be more cost effective so that, yes, it's going to cost some money up front, but long term, it should work that then the monthly cost to operate the building should be able to come down as we can make things more energy efficient. And then better delivery of services to fulfill that mission of being a hub for the community. So everything we're doing, again, is about the community and continuing to make that hub work. And I think especially with that idea, this kind of renaissance and all the activity happening around here, for the library to continue to be the hub for all of those people, as potentially there's more folks living closer downtown, I just think it kind of builds on itself in that way. Here's the scary part, and I'm just throwing it out here because to me, I'm not good at keeping secrets. I like to be upfront. So here's where we were at. So when you look at the budget, and I mentioned the facilities assessment, the cost to just do those repairs that we found was about $9 million. And that is a very shockingly high number, I know. Just to benchmark that, if we wanted to build a 50,000 square foot library, the cost to build a new building of the same size in today's dollars, and I'm saying this because we've bid a couple of these, they're roughly costing about $600 a square foot, which I know is a shocking number as well, but it is what it takes to build a library. It would take about $32 million to build this building if you started with nothing. That would be the building, the parking lots, all the infrastructure to get it done if I just had a field to build in. And I give you those because those are kind of the bookends of what we're talking about. Our cost to renovate is somewhere in the middle of that, and I don't know what that is. And the reason I don't know is not because I have no clue what it costs to build stuff. I know pretty well what it costs to build stuff. But part of this will be driven ultimately by what do we want this space to be. So I throw that out because of where we started. So we've kind of come full circle. Ultimately, we are going to pay for this. I mean, the library is funded by taxpayer dollars. So we all have to have some understanding, which is why I see no point in hiding that there is a significant cost to this. So we need to be making good decisions, thoughtful decisions about what we're putting into this, because we are making a 50 plus year investment in our community. So what we're getting ready to jump into is kind of the interactive component of this, where we do want your feedback. So even though in the previous slides we showed, hey, there's percentages that are of surveys that are saying here's what people have said they want in the library, that was only 1,000 people in Wayne County that responded to that. We want to capture as many opinions as possible to make sure we're serving as many people as possible with what's being done. So that's why we never assume that we've got the full picture. We're always trying to get as much information as we can until the 11th hour. So what we're going to look for is feedback on these areas: the entrance, the outdoor site uses, the potential for a business center, genealogy and history, the adults library, the community spaces within the library, and then the teens and the children. So the way we're going to do that is, and these are, and I know everybody's going to turn their head as soon as I say this, so I'll just pause for effect. On the boards behind you are these images. So I'm going to go through them quickly, but what they are is the opportunity for you all to, it's a very simple exercise. It's not going to take much effort. You're going to have stickers to just tell us, what do you like in green, and what do I not like in red? So what we would like you to do in each of these areas for like outdoor site uses, as example number 1, is if there's an image you really like I really like the way that, you know, those leaves up there in that upper right, those are neat little shade structures. I really like that. That's my favorite image on that whole area there. Take your one, because I just want you to do 1 red and 1 green for each of these areas. So 1 red, 1 green in outdoor site uses. Put your green sticker on that leaf and say, man, I really like that. Or you're like, you know, I really don't like the way that, you know, all that's just a bunch of glass there in that upper right one. There's nothing very much interesting for me personally. I'm going to put my red sticker there. Perfectly fine. The idea is that we can start to quantify and say, gosh, nobody really liked the one that, you know, on the bottom in the middle there because it feels kind of dark, or, you know, whatever the reason is. That got no stickers. Then, you know, we're not going to pursue things like that. It helps give us an idea of what all are people thinking for that outdoor site use connection from indoor to outdoor, as an example. And then on each of these, we just put a few little terms and phrases up there of indoor-outdoor spaces. You know, flexibility is one thing that's been talked about. Connections to the surrounding area. So how does a space like this connect to the surrounding area? Those are prompts and phrases and words that it came out of all the literature that we had read from the surveys that had been done previously. So with entrance, again, all of these images that you're seeing up there are back there. So talking about initial visitor experience, accessibility, what looks like a beacon or a landmark that makes it clear here's the library, you know, and what's convenient as an entry point. The business center, this just has a variety of ways to kind of look at meeting spaces. So provide a unique and dedicated space, workspace and technology, small meeting rooms. Genealogy and history rooms, we've seen everything from I want my old Indiana room where, you know, there's a Conestoga wagon in there to, hey, it's digital and I can touch and do stuff. So, you know, what would you like to see if we're going to do something with genealogy and history having a more prominent place in the library? Same thing with adults, you know, just a variety of seating options, study options, quiet reading spaces, you know, more group kind of activity spaces. Community engagement. A lot of what we've seen with the libraries is because there are overlaps in services that the library becomes a clearinghouse for other organizations to potentially come in, larger meeting type spaces. We've seen literal theaters in some spaces. You know, we've seen smaller collaborative rooms like the one on the upper right here, you know, where you can kind of come in and have an organization do a presentation, and that can change monthly. So just kind of what kind of spaces would be nice to have in the library. Teens, you know, providing a unique space for them, vibrant and dynamic with integrated technology. That was a lot of what we saw in the teens' feedback, but there's a lot of different approaches in terms of furniture and color. Similar with children's, you know, zones for different ages, a lot of colorful, celebrating creativity and energy. Ultimately, this is what we're going to end up with. Is a board. This is one that we did for something else. We're looking at what kind of facade did they want on the building. But you can see here, we had some that got no love whatsoever. We got some that got 1, you know, sticker's worth of love, and everybody seemed to be settling on this other one. This is our way to kind of take that qualitative, what are you thinking, feeling about stuff, and start to say, well, the community's telling us this is kind of where you want to be, so that'll start helping to tell us where to go with some of this. The other component is if you don't see anything you like, or you don't feel like you've been heard, or you didn't participate in past surveys and you want to add some commentary about any of these categories, there's pins and just boards back there, and there's one for every area. So for entrance, there's a list where you can say anything you want about the entrance that you think we need to hear about what's important to you. So a couple of ways you can provide some feedback.